Hello and welcome everyone to our November one-day summit, Somatic Attachment Healing. My name's Allison and I'm your host for this workshop entitled Attachment and Inner Relationship with Dr. Maureen Gallagher. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Maureen Gallagher.
Yeah, thank you, Allison. Thanks so much. And hello, everybody. It's great to see you all. And I'm so excited to see so many people here with me to spend this hour talking about attachment, somatics, and inner relationship. I know many of you are probably just coming off of Diane Poole-Heller's talk. Diane was a big mentor of mine from the somatic experiencing world, and I know how good the information she is that she shares. So I'm really glad to be coming behind her, knowing that you have just been hearing that. My name is Maureen Gallagher. I'm coming to you from New Jersey, and I have been in and around the world of attachment for a really long time. And when I first started reading about attachment theory, I felt like I understand the world better. I understand myself better. I understand my reactions to people and relationships better than I did before I knew about attachment theory. It was life-changing for me to understand that I made sense. My reactions to people and relationships were not, I wasn't crazy. I had had a difficult childhood, and this made me understand that better. Now, that said, I didn't feel like I had great tools to address that with. That attachment theory was really, when it first formed many years ago by Bowlby, it was an answer to a problem. And that problem for him was psychoanalysis. And psychoanalysis had a really big, they were trying to explain everything intrapsychically, what happened inside of people. And Bowlby came along and said, you know what, that's not enough. The environment, and especially the early caregiving environment, has a huge impact on our later relationships. He was roundly rejected by the psychoanalysts of the day. And I thought to be like, no, everything is about what's happening inside of a person instead of between people, and especially that early caregiving environment. So he was a corrective. Now, that said, that was like 50 years ago. Now we look at Bowlby and we say, is it enough? Is what the work that he did along with Mary Ainsworth, is it enough? And a lot of times we say, no, that's not enough. We need more in order to understand who we become as a result of our early relationships. I went on to study with people like Sue Johnson, who I think really help us so much to begin to heal from those early relationships. And maybe even more importantly, with Peter Levine, the founder of Somatic Experiencing. And there I discovered that when we come into the world, and about half of us are met with good enough parenting, we're responded to. Our caregivers are accessible to us. They're engaged with us. And that's good enough for us to come to believe that relationships are good and supportive, are going to help us through life. But for about a little less than half of us, the environment is not, and the caregiving is not quite good enough for us to believe that. We either respond to relationships as though they're going to be rejecting of us and we have to kind of protect ourselves through withdrawing and pulling back, or as though we have to pursue in order to get our needs met. We have to work hard in order to make sure that the environment responds to us. When that happens too much, or perhaps even worse, our environment is scary. Either our caregivers are scared themselves, or they are scary to us, or both. When that happens, we might have this approach avoid relationship. Like, I want to go toward that relationship, but it gets scary and I pull back. These are all coping strategies for challenging environments. We're designed to get as much as we can of what we need out of our environment and out of our caregivers. And none of our caregivers are perfect. I really want to say that right from the outset, that many people come to attachment work and immediately start feeling bad about themselves, maybe themselves as caregivers of others. They feel guilty and bad. But no caregiving environment is perfect. And we are all a product of generations of difficulty. I think of that as both the good news and the bad news of attachment is we have generations of just that we are all here means we survived, which means our environments were good enough for us to survive and be here. And we have generations of strengths, resilience, good things that we bring to our challenges, and we have challenges that need to be addressed. Maybe we have generation upon generation of avoidant behavior in relationship, that every time something difficult happens, we pull away. My answer to difficulty or challenge in a relationship is, I'm going to go away and I'll come back when I feel better. And that's kind of an avoidant relationship to attachment-related threats. Or something difficult happens in relationship. I can't stop talking to you until we resolve this. We have to talk until we can resolve it, until we can figure it out. So that's more anxious relationship to attachment-related threats. Or like that terrifying environment can result in what we call a fearful avoidance stance. I move toward you, but it's scary, and then I move away. I move toward you, and it's scary, and I move away. I can't move. I'm not happy when I'm too far away. I'm not happy when I'm too close. I have sort of a range at which I'm most comfortable in relationship to attachment. So we have all these different ways of responding to that early caregiving environment. I also want to say it's not all about the early caregiving environment. The early research was all about caregiving. Now we know there's more than that. Babies can be impacted by illness, injury, prenatal environments. It's not all about the caregiving that they get. There's a video that I love of Peter Levine working with a baby who had birth-related trauma. A lot of difficulty coming into the world. He was stuck in the birth canal for about 5 hours. And once he emerged, his little nervous system had shut down. He wasn't really responding very much to his parent, even though the caregiver was really trying very hard to engage her baby. The baby went into autonomic nervous system shutdown and had to be supported to kind of wake up his little body so that he could interact with the world more in a better way. So it's not all about how the parents interact with the child. It's also about the other sorts of difficulties that a baby might live through on their way into the world, and other factors that meet the baby, like illness. Some babies have sickness when they're young, and that affects their ability to interact with the world. We know many of you have probably heard of the Adverse Childhood Experiences Scale. That tells us about difficult things that can happen in a child's life that lead to difficulty later on in life. We know that this impact doesn't just affect one generation. It affects lots of generations. So for example, my family immigrated from Ireland in the 1920s during the potato famine. That potato famine epigenetically affects me to this day and will affect many generations after me. So the environments that we live through affect not just us through epigenetics. They affect living through that famine, and then that immigration will affect everybody after me in my lineage for a number of generations. This is both a great thing when we move towards healing, and a challenging thing when difficult things happen. We think of parents as, oh, our children and the children that we raise are affected by who we are. We don't always realize they're affected by who raised us and who raised them and who raised them. This is both a great thing and a difficult thing. The great thing is that you're more impacted by those who raise you than anyone else. So if you're living in a very difficult world, in a very challenging situation, children that you raise still have a great chance of emerging relatively secure because you raised them. They are less impacted by their communities, by their worlds, by uneven distribution of resources, by prejudice, by sexism. They are less impacted by that because of you. That if you are less impacted by those things, the children you raise will also be less impacted by those things because you are the most formative influence on the children you raise. And then there's the challenges. Let's say you lost someone important to you when you were a child and you never resolved that grief. Or you were deeply impacted by environmental circumstances that you were powerless over. Those also get passed on to those you raise. So the good news is, the more we heal from what we live through, the more those we raise are secure in their attachments. It's it's a cycle of, it's both extremely protective in that we're most influenced by those who raised us, and that protects us from the outside world immeasurably. But it also subjects us to something different. What if we're raised by people who weren't so healthy? Then we have to deal with that kind of influence. So there's the impact. I'm going to share a few slides with you just to sort of look at childhood attachment and then adult attachment. We think about childhood attachment all the time, but it's also important for us to look at adult attachment. Adult attachment is often the place where people start to make changes. Once they become adults, they say, you know what, I think something went wrong, and I have to start to address this in myself. There are lots of things that went right, but there's some things that maybe didn't go as well, things that you need to take a look at and want to make some changes around. So let's look at the kinds of things that can go wrong, and then let's look at what's the most supportive way to make changes in relation to attachment-related injuries, because we know a little bit about that as well. So first, I'm going to share screen. I'm going to go through a few slides just in relationship to attachment. Or actually, maybe I'm going to show you like a really short video. This is about an experiment called a strange situation. It's one of the ways that we measure attachment. I'm going to tell you in advance in case some people find this difficult, but I want you to know the kids are okay. The caregiver leaves the room and a stranger comes in, and we're looking at how do babies respond to this? Can they recover? Is it really hard for them to recover? Do they act like nothing happened? It lets us know a little bit about their attachment. So I'm going to share that with you.
This experiment, which I watched through a two-way mirror, is designed to gauge how secure is the crucial relationship between mother and child.
This bunny is going to go here, and that bunny will be on top. The value of the test has been established in studies that would watch a child 1-year-old and then follow it up and interview them about their relationships to their parents when they were 21 years old. So we're quite confident in the long-term significance of this relationship.
After several minutes play, the mother is signaled to leave the room.
Get you back in 1 minute.
They're sitting for you. So, I feel that she'll survive. The key moment in the experiment is the child's reaction to her mother's return.
The important clue is whether the baby's able to become calmed down by the contact with the mother, get back to play. Sometimes it takes a couple of minutes. You see, when the mother was out, she was only interested in the mother, no interest in the toys. Now she has a contact with the mother. She's beginning to show a little interest in the environment, and shortly she'll be right back with the toys where we started.
So you would call this a secure one?
Yes, yes.
It's certainly much heavier.
Goes to the door following her. Now, we sent the mother right back in. The point here is not to distress the baby. We're just trying to challenge it. The baby puts her hands to her face, a sad expression, puts her face down. When she picks her up, she keeps her head down, her arms out, and then she sits in the chair holding the baby. The baby's still sullen. He's low-keyed.
So you would call this insecure?
Yes, insecure. He's avoidant. He's not engaging her, and it's not the reunion's not effective. And it's important to remember here that the thing that upset him was her absence. Her return should be the solution to his problem. Now, this is another pattern that we see in babies who are not good at using their mother as a secure base at home. This baby is also insecure. But you'll see, we got a look at his play before the separation. Mother's left. When she returns, she picks him up. He can't calm down. He's still upset. She offers a toy to amuse him or to comfort him or to distract him, and he slaps it away. She offers another. He slaps it away. He's angry. We call these babies resistant or ambivalent because they both want her back and yet can't use the contact. We think that the difficulty is that in the past, when he sought comfort, she's been inconsistent as to whether she's available and responsive or not.
So that experiment is a really famous experiment of one of the ways how they tell whether children are developing as securely attached. Do they respond positively to the return of a parent? Can they make use of that parent? And then get curious and interested about the environment because they're reassured that someone is there for them. Or when the parent returns, do they either act disinterested or is it really impossible for the child to be reassured and then become interested in the environment? And these are different ways that different kids respond to separation. Yeah, thank you. I'm noticed. I just saw that. What about disorganized? Disorganized was actually a category that was added later after secure, anxious, and avoidant. I am not actually going to show a video of disorganized. There are plenty of these videos on YouTube, but I know that they can be really distressing. It's a really big group, and I know that sometimes people get pretty distressed by seeing the disorganized kids. I'll describe it. The children sometimes freeze in place. They sometimes move toward the mother, freeze in place, move away. They don't know what to do. It looks like it looks like children dissociating. And that I know that can be hard to see little kids dissociating. So I'm not going to show a video of it, but I will pause here just to see if you have some questions. Oh, okay. So I have one that was a direct message to me, and it says, If you had attentive parents, but still have ambivalent attachment, where else could the ambivalent attachment come from? And we have to remember that there can be extremely important life events that can lead to any of the attachment insecurities. That while most attachment research, which was a huge body of research, thousands and thousands of studies, really strong literature base, but from my perspective, there are things that it did not adequately take into account, like prenatal environments. Sometimes, like I described, that kids who go through labor and delivery problems, kids who early in their lives become ill or have crises happen in their lives that take their parents away from them. Let's say you have an amazing caregiver or caregivers, but perhaps there's environmental things going on that lead your caregiver to not be able to consistently parent you because there's an environmental crisis going on, that could lead to anxious attachment as well. Or let's say your parent needs to work like 12-hour days. That could result in anxious attachment. It is by no means do all children with parents who work long days have anxious attachment. Some parents and kids have constitutions. So some constitutions are going to be stronger or more protected than other constitutions. We see kids come in every day who are anxious by the nature of their autonomic nervous system, not just, and then that child will respond more strongly to changes in their caregiving environment. I do see a raised hand or two. So Allison, you want to call in a couple people?
Yeah, for sure. I think Eve was first. Eve, you can unmute.
Hi, I had a question about generational trauma and the epigenetics. Specifically, like my dad came from a really abusive family. When he had my sisters and me, he cut them off entirely. So I never met anyone from my dad's side. But my dad, in raising us, I felt a lot of the avoid parenting from him, and he has since passed. So I'm wondering if you can speak to the epigenetics, not only from his actions of cutting off his family to protect us, but then also I have this like he died when I was 13. So there's this extra cutoff level. So I'm wondering about that.
Absolutely. So there's a lot there. And of course, much more than I can speak to. But you're exactly right that the transgenerational piece is so very powerful, that your dad tried to correct a really difficult environment that he had by separating from a difficult environment and protecting you from that. But he himself was deeply impacted by it, as well as, and you were impacted by the loss of him and the separation from your grandparents. So it's like, he did a really good thing to try to protect you. And yet still there will be impact of like, what might have been there? What might have been there might have been worse than what you did have. And so this might have been a net positive, but it could still leave you, like you said, he, as a result of what he lived through, had this approach avoid pattern, that had not been healed in him as a parent. Now that presents for you what I call the opportunity, that the opportunity lives in you to sit with this pattern in your nervous system. I think that our awareness now, I teach both somatic experiencing as well as interrelationship focusing, and it's become very, very clear to me that what we have now that we did not have in the past is a deep understanding, an ever deepening understanding of the autonomic nervous system. Polyvagal theory has taught us that, when we have this, what we call a neuroceptive experience of safety, which is beyond my perception, it's more than my perception. I might walk into a room and suddenly feel stiff or chilled or cold. I might not register, but I might now know of like, I don't feel entirely safe and I don't know why. I might look around. We call this orienting in somatic experiencing. Let's look around. I'm using my head and neck to move out of stiffness to actually evaluate my environment. Now that might reassure me of like, oh, I think what was making me nervous was, or I might be like, I can't see it, but there's something wrong here. So sometimes it's an intuitive feel that there's something wrong, or it might be as I look around, I see that the room, this is not even conscious. I just look around and it registers that their room is calm. And I have a neuroceptive experience of relative safety. If that doesn't happen, I'm more likely to be sympathetically activated, like, oh, there's something wrong. I better be vigilant. What's going on here? Or if I get really, really, really activated, I might shut down and say, freeze. Freeze is my best response here. If I freeze, maybe no one will notice me and maybe I'll live through this. And that might be my way of getting through things. So Stephen Porges did us an enormous, enormous gift of his work in the polyvagal theory. My feeling is that then the two people who contributed most to the possibilities of our healing are Peter Levine and Ann Weiser-Cornell in her work with Barbara McGavin. So Peter Levine said, let's use the body to really see how we register that neuroceptive feeling, and to work with that inside of our bodies through the experience of our sensations, our emotions, but not just the experience of sensation and emotion, of how does that live in our bodies? And can we begin to discern, oh, for example, my belly and chest feel contracted and tight. But when I check in with my legs and my feet, they're actually feeling pretty good and solid. And if I feel all of that, I begin to recognize it's not just one thing. Something in me says this environment's a little off, and something in me says, I'm okay. And both of those are true. Both of those exist within my body. If I can begin to discern that my body is not one thing, my body is having multiple reactions and I can be with all of them, I can also likely metabolize some of my experience. I no longer have to be ruled not only by the responses of my autonomic nervous system, which are determined not just by my experiences, but by my parents' experiences, their caregivers' experiences, their caregivers' experiences, generation upon generation of response to our environment. Some of which is incredibly helpful. Some of which is warning us of things that are still problematic and still true to this day. And other things which are not, like I am not living with a potato famine. My grandparents did, and their parents did, and their parents did. And there was famine in my background for many generations. I don't experience famine. That I orient to famine is about my multi-generational history, and I want to heal from that. I want to be able to look around and say, oh, there is food abundance in my world, and what is that like for my nervous system? So I want to support my nervous system to update to its current conditions while maintaining what can I learn that is actually still true and helpful about my multi-generational past, and what's no longer helpful, what's no longer true. Can I support my nervous system to update and to recognize that is not a top-down learning. That's not a top-down learning. We have to learn that. By that, I mean we have to learn that from the bottom up, from our bodily felt experience, and let that inform our brains. More information goes from our body to our brain than our brain to our body. About 70% of information from our nerves goes from our bodies to our brains, and about 30% from our brains to our body. So I forget who coined this term, but someone coined the term of like from the body to the brain is the information superhighway. And from your brain to your body is like a 3-lane road. It's not bad, a 3-lane road, but 7 lanes is better as far as information making it from your body to your brain. So if your body can take in, I'm relatively safe at this moment, that helps your nervous system to begin to calm and for you to be in a more relaxed and ready place. I'm going to take a question in a moment. Further, we want that space to heal from these intergenerational attachment-related injuries. But I also referred to the work of Ainsworth Cornell and Barbara McGavin. They were influenced by Eugene Gendlin. Peter Levine was as well. Peter Levine used Gendlin's work to go on and to develop a model of working with the autonomic nervous system. Ainsworth Cornell and Barbara McGavin focused their work on something they call inner relationship. And that's, I can make a relationship within my body to these ways of functioning that I have. So rather than it being, I'm scared and I don't know why, they would change that language to something in me is scared. And I'm not sure why, but I can be with that. I can notice, there's something in me that's scared. I feel that in my stomach. And as I feel that in my stomach, I notice it's deeply unsettled. And it's letting me know that it's afraid that I'm going to be rejected by this group of people in this room. And I'm letting it know I really get that. So Ainsworth Cornell and Barbara McGavin added this piece that says, oh, I can make a relationship with my own states that involve emotions and sensations in a way that can be transformative. So these two bodies of work, somatic experiencing and inner relationship focusing together, can help us transform attachment-related trauma, injuries, as well as transgenerational patterns that we've inherited. Now, this is really hopeful because when we've tried to change attachment patterns in the past, like from when I was first in graduate school 30 years ago, we were trying all these top-down approaches, Not a lot of change was happening. We had a lot of information. We understood so much, except how to change it, except how to, in a healthy and supportive way, support transformation. Now with these more somatic models that involve somatic awareness, this is the site of change. This supports us to create actual change. All right, let me turn to you, Allison. You can call in another person or two.
Sure, so Tori was next.
Okay. Hi, Tori.
Hi. It's really cool because I started my journey on learning about a lot of this back when they were doing those experiments.
Yeah.
And so seeing how much that we've learned that we thought we knew that we didn't know.
Yeah.
What are they doing now to address, because the population I'm working with specifically has been impacted by the RBS. And now with all the information coming out that, no, we weren't crazy. We weren't lying. Our children really didn't come home. Our government really didn't care. There's also a difference in these children because the children that are born even now, if they're in a family that's still traditional, where it's the entire community raising the child, when mom leaves, mom coming back may not be what settles the child. Like you could see with that second child, he was crying, but he did, not the second, the third child, his shoulders did move forwards, his body did relax into the hold.
Yeah.
But he also looked like he was waiting for somebody else who was supposed to have been there, that he's used to reassuring that everything is still okay. And I see that a lot with the kids that I'm working with. And it's one of the things I really don't like the parent-child intervention team that Washington State chose to adapt, because that practice is so traumatizing to children, because they only allow one parent to come in. And it may not be the parent coming back that soothes that child. It may be the auntie, it may be the grandmother, it may be that mom wasn't able to chest feed, but grandmother or auntie is doing the chest feeding. But if they only allow the biological mother there, then none of the rest of that support network is in place. And this child is like, this is not okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how are we adapting for that?
Well, I mean, I think that as you're noticing, like changes are happening. So much change has happened over the last 30 years for us to better understand that the original models, while such a contribution, are not enough. We need much, much, much more. Advances are happening all the time. Does that mean that Washington is going to be the most forward-thinking body? I don't think so. That never has been. But that doesn't mean that our culture as a whole or worldwide cultures don't change. They move forward and they move back. They move forward and they move back. So I think part of what I'm hearing is your frustration that, one, even what we do know is not adequately integrated into our culture, so that the research is ahead of the practice. And then, and even the research isn't as far ahead as perhaps things we're noticing in our lives. And so I think of it as there is always this lag. You know, there's I don't even know what to call it, the relief of reading something or seeing something and saying, oh my God, that's so true, that's so helpful. But it doesn't go far enough. And then maybe the research over the years goes further and further and further, but our awareness is even ahead of that. And then we're looking at implementation in our schools and our governments, and that's well behind the research. So I think there will always be frustration about these lags of we know better, we know better, we know better, and we do. And yet, I just think of it as change happens in this way. Some of us will we're always going to feel frustrated. We're never going to feel fully satisfied by the pace with which we integrate things, because it's not going to serve everyone. And so I think that we often have to, and we do, fill in the gaps in our communities, fill in the gaps at I think of it as, when I teach somatic experiencing, people will often say, well, it's individual work is not enough. We need much bigger work. And individual work is not enough, and yet is often the difference between creating sanity and healing in our lives and not. And so I think individual health and healing, community level health and healing, these layers of support will often be the difference between a child growing up with what it needs and a child not growing up with what it needs. And so in some ways, thank God for individuals and communities. And governments and government created programs and government level response can help, but it's never enough. And so I think that that's my beginning response to your understandable frustration.
I think you just touched on it, because who has access to the resources to do the testing and to do the research? It's people who are colonized. And so they're looking at everything through that lens of this is the way things are done. And all the people I'm working with are like, no, you guys are the ones who brought all the problems. We didn't have these problems before you came. Mm-hmm. So, and that seems to be universal, whether I'm working with people in Wales, whether I'm working with the Basque in Spain, or whether I'm working with Indigenous people here in the States. That seems to be the universal. No, y'all messed it up. Like your research is not going to fix it. You need to start listening to us and work with us, because we know what works. It worked for millions of years. It's only in the past 500 it hasn't. And it's not because it doesn't work. It's because you haven't allowed us to do it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So,
Really recognizing what should be a bi-directional relationship doesn't feel like it is.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you very much.
thank you. All right, next question. Let's take like one or two more and then I'm going to go on.
Okay, I think Doris is next.
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for taking my question.
Yes.
So my mom is 92, and about 2 years ago, she said to me, I think I may have had postpartum depression, because she just heard about it. She
Yeah,
didn't know. And so my question for you is, how will that influence the child's nervous system? And number two, if mom is still alive, is there any kind of conversation I can have with her about this?
yeah, absolutely. So one thing I want to say, I deeply learned from Peter Levine. What Peter says is trauma is not an event, it's in the nervous system. Just what you referenced of what happens in the nervous system. A child who grows up with a mom, caregiver who suffered from postpartum depression. Not every child will have this impact that I'm going to describe. It's some kids, what we notice in their brains is that where you might expect a relationship between feelings and behavior to be, the brain actually goes dark. And so the relationship between feeling and action is lessened by probably not having like parents, a caregiver suffering from postpartum depression may go into shutdown and freeze themselves as a result of their depression and have a lower rate, sometimes much lower rate of responsiveness to the child in their care. One, this is not always true. Sometimes despite postpartum depression, the caregiver is responsive to the baby crying or having needs. Other caregivers, when suffering from depression, have much lower rates of responsiveness, and that can lead to this lessening reaction in the baby, likely because they stop expecting responsiveness to their communicating distress. And so that relationship gets attenuated in the baby. The baby doesn't expect so much that the caregiver is going to respond when they're crying in distress. So that can happen. So if you grow up and you're like, wow, I have a very low relationship to distress and action. I tend not to act when I'm distressed. That relationship may need to be strengthened in the adult. I think of it as like, again, here's Peter Levine's work of I go into freeze all the time. How can I move out of the don't move into, is there movement that would benefit me? Is there increased agency that would have me feeling more active and like I'm an agent in my environment and like I can have an impact on my world? So that's one thing that might need to be strengthened in someone who grows up with a parent who suffered from postpartum depression when they were an infant. As far as the conversations you might have with your mom, I think it would be good just to ask her what it was like. What was it like to be depressed right after you gave birth? What was it like to try to bond with you as a child? Was it hard? Or did she feel like, no, I was really bonded to you? I was also, the way she might have felt that it affected her and you in your early life it could be very healing for both of you to have those conversations. And that might be a place to start.
Thank you so much.
Sure. I'll take one more question and then let's move on.
Okay, we have Jessie.
Hi, thank you so much. My question is about the long-term physical effects of early childhood trauma. And I know that that's true for me, but I find sometimes that I'm like shy or embarrassed to talk about it because I feel like people won't believe it, that people know that I have health problems, but they might not be able to make the connection. I was born full term at 2 pounds, 15 ounces. I spent, first 6 weeks in the incubator. And it took me decades to realize that my mom was, anxious attachment to her.
Yeah.
So that, and I've had multiple weird health problems, and I won't go into the story. I'm sure you can imagine, but I'm wondering if there's some research that I could, like, if even I could just have a quote and say, this expert proves that, my back problem, my long-term concussion problems, my, et cetera, has a root.
Yeah. Well, I think that Peter Levine's work speaks quite a lot to this. And I think there's actually a number of pre and perinatal researchers that speak to this, that when we have difficulty very, very early in life, it can lead to, one, autonomic nervous system difficulties in regulating the nervous system. And that in turn can lead to sort of higher levels of stress hormones, which are really harder to metabolize, which can leave us vulnerable. The ACEs studies really showed us so powerfully how that can lead to quite a lot of vulnerability to both, as adults, both mental health symptoms and physical illness. And so it's not just the impact on our mental health, it's the impact on our physical health. We can become much more prone to autoimmune conditions, but also to illnesses you might not expect, like diabetes and cancers and other health problems as a result of early stresses in our childhood environments. Now, those aren't just caregiving. Those are many things, like your parent loses their parent and becomes depressed, or a family member is separated from the family. These things can affect kids. Now, your experience was even more. There was even more to deal with. So there's a lot that could have resulted in the nervous system sort of struggling to regulate. And so practices that support autonomic nervous system regulation may help. Your question was more about how do you show others that this is real? And probably the biggest studies are the ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences studies.
Yeah, but when I do the ACEs, I don't get a super high score because
no, I know, I get that.
In the ACEs, right?
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And we need to understand, just like that early attachment research, the ACEs study was a huge study of just 10 variables. There are so many things that weren't studied then, but more studies have emerged looking at more variables, not just those originals that were studied, but recognizing that initial study was as huge as it was a drop in the bucket for all the things that can affect children and their development. All right, I will come back and take some more questions. There's just a couple of other things I want to talk about. I'm going to show you a model of adult attachment. Phil Shaver, Mario Michelintzer, Marcia Hazan all took these childhood attachment concepts and started looking at, well, what happens once you grow up? Is it the same? Is it different? And it has a lot in common, but there are slightly different ways that we look at attachment in adults. And I think it's important as far as our change strategies and how we support healing and change in adults from these childhood attachment difficulties. And particularly, I'm talking about, this is multi-generational trauma. So of course, we're all wanting healing from the things that we have been impacted by over the generations. So I'll just share an initial diagram, and I hope it's clear at this point that I view research as extremely helpful and important, and by no means does it cover everything we want to consider as people. It's not enough. It tells us some important things, and it's very limited. in what it looks at. So I'm going to just show you, this is Bartholomew, and Bartholomew's model of attachment by 2 dimensions. And those 2 dimensions, Bartholomew, and this was picked up by Shaver, Michelintzer, and Hazan, said that when you want to look at adult attachment, it's really important to look at anxiety and avoidance. These 2 dimensions, anxiety and avoidance. And you can see these 2 poles here. If you look on the right, we have anxious. And you look on the left, we have self-confident. I guess that's the way they're going to express the opposite of anxious. On the pole that goes top to bottom, avoidance. At the bottom, high levels of avoidance. At the top, low levels of avoidance. So Shaver, Michelintzer, and Hazan picked this up, and we want to recognize that here in adults, we look at continuum rather than quadrant. So anxiety is a continuum from a little bit more to quite a lot. Avoidance from a little bit quite more to no avoidance at all. So if we look at this top left quadrant, we can say, oh, this person has low anxiety and low avoidance. They're not avoiding people and they're not anxious about being with people. They're secure. They're comfortable with intimacy and autonomy. So they're comfortable both with others and on their own. In close relationships, they're confident in themselves and they resolve conflict with others constructively. And so I want you to see and really get that what results from positive, supportive, or positive enough, they don't have to be perfectly positive, positive, supportive enough relationships is that we both can make use of others and rely on ourselves. We're both more self-confident and we seek others out. Both are true. And this results in our having lots of support for ourselves, that we need that to have support for our own goals as individuals, as well as being able to make use of relationships in a way that feels good to us. Every one of us is a little different in the balance of how much autonomy and how much relationship contributes to our ability to regulate our own nervous system, to feel good in our own bodies. For some of us, it's all about being with others. For others of us, it's all about what can I do on my own. For most of us, it's some of each that we need in order to feel good inside of ourselves. So if we look at the top right quadrant, this person seeks others out, but they're also really anxious. They have a negative model of themselves, perhaps. They're overly invested and involved in close relationships. It's all about the relationship. They're dependent on others for their self-worth. They can be, when stressed, demanding, needy, approach orientation toward others. There's something in them that thinks that the answer to their dysregulation when they become dysregulated is out there. I need to go to others to regulate me. There's not a strong enough model of what do I need to do for myself to regulate. So that's what's missing. And what they have is the ability to move towards others, but not to make use of it in a way that regulates themselves. On the bottom left, this person's model of self is pretty good. They're self-confident, they're not anxious, but they're highly avoidant. They avoid intimacy with others. They're almost compulsively self-reliant. They can be distant in relationship and they can downplay the importance of intimate relationships. So this person might say that what they often do is if they are upset in a relationship, they say, I'm going and I'm going to come back later once I feel better. So they're answer to interpersonal distress is to go off on their own to try to regulate and then come back once they feel better. This is not a terrible strategy. I'm not saying it to judge it. I'm saying that we should know that the vulnerability in this is of devaluing relationship and saying it's less important to them than it actually is. When we measure this person's stress hormones, like they might say, I'm fine and I'm going off by myself. But we measure their stress hormones, they're sky high. So they think they're going to feel better, but they don't, or at least something in them doesn't. They may feel better emotionally, but their body is saying there's something really wrong here. I'm still really stressed out. Now over here on the lower right, I was talking about that environment where the caregiver might be afraid or terrifying. And this can result in the child who later becomes an adult who's anxious and might have a negative model of self, and also avoidant, has a negative model of others as well. We call this fearful avoidant, and they may be dependent on others, but they may also at the same time avoid intimacy because of fear of rejection. Their self-esteem might be low, and attachment-related anxieties can be very high. So it's almost like, how do you regulate this body? It has the most difficulty finding ways to regulate. Now, all of this research, which is really good research, but kind of like I said before, the treatment strategies associated with more traditional research, I don't think they're not what I would want in terms of what might help. I've already said that I feel that the best support to heal from attachment-related injury and difficulties early in life is somatic and interrelationship focusing. We need the body. The body often shows us those pre-verbal strategies we came upon before we could even speak. Strategies by the time we were children and later adults were so much a part of the fabric of our being, we couldn't even see them. We can't even name them. We don't even know what they are. Other people actually know more about them than we do. Other people can tell us, I've noticed whenever we get in a fight, I don't see you for 2 days. And we might be like, oh, I was just busy. But if we think about it, it's like, oh, every time we get in a fight, I get busy. Or every time you and I have a disagreement, I feel like you call me 5 times a day. And we might be like, well, that's because you're not answering me. Having really no awareness that actually it's because my nervous system is dysregulated. And the only answer I can envision is if you can say something or do something that makes me feel less anxious, then I can regulate. So a lot of times other people know more about our attachment related strategies than we do. And sometimes we have to actually ask the people in our lives, our friends, our families, our loved ones, have you noticed any patterns in how I respond when we're having difficulties with each other? Some of us do know this about ourselves, of how we respond to attachment related difficulties. And first, what's an attachment figure? An attachment figure is anyone in our lives to whom we respond when we are in conflict with them by feeling injured in some way. This is not okay for this person and I to be upset with each other. That's not okay. That's probably an attachment figure for me. And that doesn't even have to be a human being. I'm attached to my dog. I don't like when he's upset with me or I'm upset with him. So when we respond to our attachment figures and the distress, our brain registers it in the same way that it registers physical pain. It says there's something wrong. Our brain acts like I've been smacked, or hurt in some way. Brain says something wrong. We might notice in the body, how does the body feel about that? Well, maybe I'm avoidant and my body feels kind of numb or shut down, and I find it really hard to respond. Or maybe I'm anxious and I respond by feeling a lot of tension in my body, contractions, my belly feels tight, my chest feels tight. So our somatic reactions also can parallel and be a part of our attachment related stance and strategies. They also become a part of the answer. Our ability to be with places that is shut down, numb, scared, contracted, tight, and to develop relationship with those is essential to our healing. So I am going to take like one more question, and then I think I want to take like the last 10 minutes just to do a guided imagery, just to start to feel in to what is it to sense your body as the place and make relationship as the place of potential transformation. I can see that there are lots of questions, but I think I'm just going to go, if there's a hand, Allison, I'll take like one question or maybe two.
Yeah, for sure. So Jane, you can unmute.
Hello everyone. I'm Maureen and thank you. I am a fellow psychotherapist as well as a somatic practicer and teach many different modalities of healing. There were few things you've said that I want to step back to. One, the brain and the superhighway. And of course, Bessel van der Kolk's title of his book is The Body Keeps the Score. And we all know that there's cellular memory and all that. And just for people, if they want to read it, it's a great book. And I'm not trying to promote anybody, but all these are like really some of the top people. I want to ask you about when you talked about the brain and the superhighway. And I've heard that said before. And I'm very curious. I'm also fascinated by Dr. Jill Bolte-Taylor and her book, Whole Brain Living. I'm wondering if you're familiar with that, and it seems like the focus is much more on the brain, not the body, but how the brain and the four characters, if people read her book, influence the body. And I want to also address that a lot of times what's happening up in our brain can affect us physically. You know, there is that kind of, which can then affect our health. So often, I mean, mental health is so stigmatized, and any invisible disability, Jesse mentioned, feeling invisible with what Jesse is going through. And I don't want to say anything Jesse didn't say, but it's hard. It's really painful. And I want to ask that question. I also, that last slide that you showed us, I'm really curious what they defined as intimate relationship. Because to me, there's a grand difference between intimate relationships that are in authentic relationships versus partner relationships. Friendships can be incredibly intimate and authentic, and so I wanted that. My last point is I just want to give a shout out to Stephen Porges, who really brought us to this place of understanding polyvagal theory. And anybody that's interested, Deb Dana, who he works with, her new book just came out called Anchored, and it's phenomenal. Deb Dana's wonderful. So just wanted to give some info out there. But thank you for what you're sharing.
Yeah.
Greatly appreciate it, but I would love some answers to my questions.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all of the people who have influenced you. These are all great resources. If you want to look further into Bartholomew's research, please do Google it. You can find some operational definitions of how he's defining things as he researched them. With the relationship, the body-brain, I think of it as body-mind being relationships. We might pull one thing out, look at this or look at that, but they're all deeply interrelated. Changing one area affects others. And from my perspective, it's just at different times we're drawn to different places to intervene. There's no correct, it's sort of like some things I'm doing might as a psychologist. Some things I'm doing might be geared towards the body and the body influencing the brain. Other things might be, let's go to that top-down approach and let's sort of be with the way the brain is impacted by things and that have that affect the body. We need all of it in order to support change, and also to recognize we all might change somewhat differently. We're not the same. And recognize, right? Recognizing what are we drawn to as people and what actually supports our transformation, and really respecting that. Many of us, like I, you know, having been in psychology for like 30 years now, I feel like I've tried so many different modalities and all of them have felt helpful. And at times I have just felt like, oh, this is a piece that was missing. So I felt that way about attachment and somatics and interrelationship focusing, all have added to the transformation. And for me, provide the clinical applications of some of the theorists that you mentioned work. I often distinguish quite a lot between theorists and application.
And that's why I brought up Deb Dana, because she's applying it, which is so ingenious in how she does that. But I really want to thank you with what you said, because I think part of this work, it's so critical to know when and how to use what.
Yeah.
And every person is different. I work with severe trauma survivors, and frequently they're very out of touch with their body. And to have them start getting in their body is very triggering. Orienting can be really triggering for people that are hypervigilant. I think we need a huge toolbox, and knowing when to use what tools and how is so critical. It's an art. It's a really beautiful, magnificent art that when you have been doing it for 30 years or more and you have all these tools, you know how to I don't like that word. You know how to reach towards them and which is best and what's not, and by the body language that you're getting from your client. So thank you. I will stop there.
Yes. I did want to spend just a couple moments, just the last few moments that we have together, just taking a moment to go into your own body. Now, for some of you, this will be so familiar. For others, you know, you might like or not like this sort of thing, but I thought at least let's take a moment to feel how this material is landing in your body, because we've just spent the last hour talking about attachment related themes. For some of you, this will be activating, and for some of you, it causes shutdown. Let's spend a moment just kind of coming into the body. I always invite people to keep your eyes open or closed, whatever is best for you. I like closing my eyes. It really helps me quite a lot. And so if you like, you can just take a moment to close your eyes wherever you're sitting. Maybe taking a breath in or noticing the breath come in. And then noticing perhaps the feel of the chair or whatever you're sitting on. If it's touching your back or beneath your legs, really feeling that. Taking a moment to notice what that's like for your body, to feel that support. And to feel the ground beneath your feet, if there is ground beneath your feet. And then perhaps noticing your arms, your legs, your hands and what they're resting on. And you can feel on the outside, your arms and legs, or on the inside, sensing inside. And drawing awareness to your head, your neck, your shoulders, allowing and inviting any movements that want to happen there. Noticing your spine, perhaps tracing the path of your spine from your tailbone up to the back of your head, just vertebra by vertebra. Noticing what happens in your body as you do so. And then drawing awareness to your heart and chest, noticing what's open, soft, resting into that. If there's tightness, constriction, just noticing that as well. Drawing awareness to your belly, your abdomen, If there's feelings of settledness, unsettledness, just noticing those. And drawing into your awareness your hips and pelvis, the whole of your pelvic bowl. You can gently sense into this area or rest into this area, whatever is best for you today at this moment. And then just taking a moment of having spoken about all these attachment related themes of what most wants awareness, or what do you notice inside in your body right now? Giving that a little attention. Perhaps letting it know, I feel you. If there's tightness, constriction, of just letting it know that it's okay for it to be here. And perhaps for you to give compassionate attention to it. If what you're aware of feels muted or vague, you can even draw a hand to where you most recognize it. Just feeling on the outside of your body. And again, letting it know you feel it. And taking a moment to notice how your body responds to just your awareness. Perhaps bringing your interest and curiosity. And then noticing again the chair at your back, beneath your legs. You might let all of this inside of your body, whatever it is you're aware of, know that you are willing to spend more time with it. If that feels right for you. And then even before you open your eyes, you might notice the room that you are sitting in. Even with your eyes closed, sensing the ground beneath your feet, the walls, the ceiling. Noticing what it's like to be sitting in this room that you are sitting in. And then as you're ready, you can open your eyes and look at this room you're sitting in. Maybe noticing what your eyes feel drawn to look at. Could be something within the room you're sitting in. If there's a window, could be something outside. And as you take this in, noticing what happens inside your body. As you take in what's outside. As you're ready, you can start to direct your attention towards all of us here on the screen. I hope that that this little bit of kind of guided imagery brings some level of increased awareness to your body, and to notice awareness doesn't have to be positive to support regulation in our bodies. Sometimes what we're encountering is not so comfortable, but that awareness itself can still draw us a little bit towards greater regulation. I hope that you have gotten some support from our time together. It has been lovely to spend time with you. I know that here at Embody Lab, we're also going to be offering a certification program for those of you who are interested in learning more about how to be with attachment-related themes in transformational ways through somatics and interrelationship. And I wish all of you good journeys in this area, this attachment-related field.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Maureen.
Have a great day, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Be well.